FanScape, a fan fiction podcast, presents Blood and Venom Part 2, Shattered Reality. Chapter 6, Haunted Memories.
For a while, there was nothing, only the inky black void of a mind at rest. Then, she found herself engulfed in milky white light, a foggy glow that felt warm and pleasant, yet cold and unnatural at the same time. She was fully aware of what was happening, and yet she couldn't make any sense of it either. It was like having a lucid dream, only she wasn't in control of it.
What is this? Where am I?
Lauren thought, looking down at her hands. She still wore the clothes that she had fallen asleep in, but everything else she'd been carrying had been taken away, including her injuries. She felt weightless, as if she was floating in a never-ending cloud of vapor. The eerie white mist that surrounded her was clinging to her skin, curling around her fingers and gently blowing through her hair like a visible, unnatural breeze.
What's happening to me?
She said aloud. Her blood ran cold when a horribly familiar voice echoed throughout the void, answering her question.
You wanted answers, Lauren, did you not? I am happy to shed some light on what's been troubling you.
The all-encompassing fog began to glow brighter, more warmly, and throughout the hazy white veil, a blurry image was shining through.
August 3rd, 1996. A date I am sure you are familiar with,
the suited man lectured. Lauren felt dread creeping into her heart, for her enemy was correct. Thanks to her research on the town of Oakside, she was well aware of the significance of that date, and she wasn't looking forward to what she was about to see. Lauren was trapped in her own mind, completely at the mercy of her faceless adversary, and she knew it. There was no point in fighting, so she didn't even try. Slowly but surely, the mist dispersed as the image took form around her. She was no longer adrift in the eerie white purgatory, but standing on the shore of a familiar body of water. It was a beautiful summer afternoon, and several families were taking advantage of the gorgeous weather, relaxing on one of the sandy beaches of Oakside Lake. There wasn't a cloud in sight in the bright blue skies above, and the refreshing breeze coming off of the water made sure to keep the beachgoers cool under the hot sun. Everyone was enjoying the day in their own way. Some people were swimming in the calm, crystal-clear water. Some were lounging in beach chairs or taking naps on towels spread across the sand. Some were playing games and having picnics with one another. And some were taking part in other activities. The smell of barbecue drifted across the beach, across the lake, and she was once again reminded of how hungry she was. Several types of boats could be seen in the distance, most of which were trailing lazily through the water while seagulls flew overhead, cawing loudly and swooping down to strike at unattended food. Nobody paid any attention to Lauren, for she was nothing more than an unseen spectator of memories from long ago, a living phantom who didn't even leave tracks in the sand. Her heart skipped a beat as she gazed across the lake, catching sight of the Oakside Park campground in its former glory. She could see the same beach where she'd once found herself targeted by the suited man's malice, but it was nothing like it had been when she was there. The park's beach was almost as populated as the one she was standing on, its boat launch full of people ready to get out on the water. The canoe rental shack was bustling with activity, the water on that side of the lake seemingly overrun with the small vessels, and the shack seemed to be selling food and refreshments as well. The gate in the chain-link fence that had once trapped her inside of the park was wide open, allowing people to pass through as they pleased. And up the hill to the right of the beach was the Oakside Park Information Center. The building overlooked the lake through a gap in the trees that she hadn't noticed before, and much like the boat launch and canoe shack, the information center was in pristine condition, a drastic contrast to the way the place had looked when she was exploring it. Lauren could see a few tents near the shoreline, more of which were undoubtedly nestled deeper in the woods, and several plumes of campfire smoke drifted into the sky above the park. It was peaceful, prosperous, nothing like the vacant bastion of horror it would inevitably become. Suddenly, Lauren was snapped out of her awestruck trance by the sound of humming. She turned to her left and saw a little boy who couldn't have been older than 6, happily building a sandcastle a few feet away. His hair was dark, and he was wearing a blue bathing suit, an innocent smile present on his face. He had a slight sunburn, but he was far too busy playing in the sand to care about that. She didn't recognize the upbeat tune that the boy was humming, but it made her smile anyway. Lauren had a soft spot for kids, and she'd always wanted to have children of her own someday. So seeing something so innocent after all of the horror she'd been through was making her emotional. However, the peaceful moment was short-lived, for when she took a closer look at the child's face, remembering the date that her enemy had spoken aloud, she felt sick to her stomach.
No. I don't want to see this. Please.
Her plea fell on deaf ears, and no response came. She could only watch as the approaching tragedy played out in the way it was meant to. And she found herself staring at a teddy bear that was propped up in the sand next to the boy's castle, her heart heavy with despair. She read the name inscribed on the stuffed animal's torso. Charlie.
Charlie! Lunch in 5!
A woman cheerily called out from atop a grassy hill near the beach. Diane Matheson had spent all morning preparing a picnic for her family, while her husband Charles was working overtime at the Coleman mines. Neither of them liked it when he had to work on weekends, but he'd managed to get the afternoon off to spend it with his family, so it wasn't all bad. It had taken their son all of 10 seconds to rush down to the beach and start playing in the sand once they'd gotten there, dragging his beloved teddy bear along with him. His grandmother had made the thing herself, and had given it to him when he was a baby, and Charlie and his bear had been inseparable ever since. Diane was keeping a close eye on her son, while Charles helped get the picnic ready, both of them eager to finally have a day together with their child. Charles had been working so much lately that Diane and Charlie hadn't seen much of him for a few weeks. Other than the weekends, they only ever saw him early in the morning and when he got home late in the evening, and Charles was usually too exhausted to stay awake for long by then. Both husband and wife would have been lying if they'd said it hadn't been hard on their relationship, especially with Diane left alone to take care of a child by herself for what felt like weeks at a time. But that didn't change the fact that they needed the money. As frustrating as their lives had become, Diane knew that Charles was doing everything he could to give her and Charlie the best life possible, and she loved him dearly for it. So she was overjoyed that they were finally able to spend some time together as a family, especially since today was Charlie's 6th birthday. The birthday boy in question heard his mother call and stood up, brushing his sandy hands off on his bathing suit.
Okay, Mommy.
He responded, surveying all of the toys he had laying in the sand. He thought about cleaning them up in case another kid took them, but decided against it, intending to return to his project after lunch. It had been his idea to go to the beach for his birthday, and a smile spread across his face as he thought about the cake, ice cream, and presents he was going to get later on. As excited as he was for that, he wasn't exactly eager to leave the beach either. And it was as he was about to take a quick dip in the lake that a bright glint of light caught his attention. Shining from far enough away that he shouldn't have been able to see it, something small was half buried in the sand near an old rowboat.
What's that?
He wondered, picking up his teddy bear and walking towards the mysterious object. When he found the source of the disturbance, Charlie was surprised to see that it was a section of his toy train that had gone missing from his bedroom a few days prior. Confused, he picked the toy up and looked it over, but almost immediately noticed the second glint of light coming from further down the beach.
Don't get too dirty out there, Charlie, and be careful near the water.
His mother called out absent-mindedly as she was putting the finishing touches on their picnic. Perhaps some unseen force was at work, for Diane normally wouldn't have been so oblivious to the fact that her son was wandering further and further away from her. As Charlie made his way across the beach, the grassy hills and tall trees that bordered the sand were soon replaced with stone outcrops, resulting in a small sandy trail that stretched between the landforms and the lake. The second train segment was located at the center of the path and the top of a small rocky ledge. Charlie pocketed the object, only to be met with the sight of another train piece sparkling in the sunlight, even further down the beach. This one was placed so close to the water that he was afraid that it would get swept away by the waves. As he gathered the third segment, Charlie thought hard about this bizarre turn of events, trying to understand what was going on. It was then that the boy understood, getting excited as he realized exactly what was happening. Mr. Slim had told him days ago that he was planning something special for his birthday, and this makeshift scavenger hunt must have been it. This wasn't the first time that his tall friend had done something like this, and Charlie loved playing his games. His parents thought that Mr. Slim was imaginary, and so did most of his friends, but Charlie knew better. Aside from his teddy bear, Mr. Slim was his best friend, and he was as real as anyone else.
Charlie! Lunch!
Diane called, but he paid no attention to her, and eagerly continued down the sandy path over another rocky ledge. It was here that the boy reached the end of the beach, finding that there was little more than mounds of stones ahead. And to his right was a sandy hill leading up into the forest. The fourth train piece was half buried at the hill's base, and Charlie quickly retrieved it and stuffed it in his pocket with the others. Suddenly, he heard the concerned voices of his parents as they realized he was gone.
Charlie?
Diane called out, turning to her husband.
Do you know where he is?
He's fine. He's down on the beach.
Charles replied, unaware that his son was missing.
No, he isn't! Where did he go?
Diane wondered aloud, standing up and making her way to where Charlie had been playing.
What the... Where is he?
Charles asked, joining his wife in her search.
Where are you? Charlie? Where'd you go?
Charlie!
His father shouted, drawing the attention of several beachgoers.
Where are you, Charlie?
Charlie didn't respond to them, knowing that his fun would be cut short if he did. He was well aware that he wasn't supposed to be out this far, and he felt bad for making his parents worry so much. So, he decided to quickly retrieve the fifth and final piece of his train, say hello to Mr. Slim, and head back to his family. He just hoped that they wouldn't be too mad at him for running off like that, especially since it was his birthday. Realizing that the only place left to look was in the nearby woods, Charlie made his way to the top of the hill and gazed into the forest, discovering that the other side was much more steep and rocky than he had been expecting it to be. It would be too difficult for him to climb back up the hill, but he knew that Mr. Slim would give him a lift if he asked for one, so he wasn't worried. However, it was when Charlie jumped down to the ground that he began to feel uneasy. Where there had been warm sunshine and the sound of birds chirping and people laughing only moments before, there was now a deafening silence and an eerie fog that sneaked through the trees, bringing with it an unnatural chill and the smell of mold. There wasn't so much as a single bird in this part of the forest, and the ground felt colder than it should have been against his bare feet as he cautiously stepped forward. He saw that the final segment of his train had been placed at the top of a large rock, and even though he collected it, he was far more concerned with his current surroundings. The strange mist was becoming thicker by the second, covering the blue sky in a smoky white sheet and making it difficult to see what was ahead. There was a cold breeze that barely managed to rustle the grass and leaves, and Charlie could have swore he was hearing an odd, creepy ambience and what sounded like occasional distorted wind chimes. He felt stupid for entering the forest wearing only his bathing suit, as the twigs and pebbles on the ground hurt his feet, and the steadily dropping temperature was making him shiver. Charlie felt a sense of dread creeping over him, a feeling he'd never experienced before. He shivered violently as he walked through the trees, waiting for a suited friend to show up and ease his fears.
Mr. Slim?
He whimpered, hoping for a response. The only answer he received was the faint sound of an ominous drum pounding in his ears, repeating endlessly and filling the child's heart with fear. He picked up his pace as he attempted to navigate the area, now looking for an exit that wasn't there. His parents were screaming for him, searching desperately for their lost child, but Charlie couldn't hear them, or anything else beyond the blanket of fog, nor would they have been able to hear him if he were to cry out. He knew that he was going to be in a lot of trouble when he got back to them, but he was starting to worry that he might not find his way out of this. Surely Mr. Slim would help him out, right? Maybe he would even explain the situation to his parents. However, Charlie knew that things weren't going to go his way as soon as he saw the menacing figure standing in the fog. He never even had the chance to feel false hope at the sight of his friend, for it was here that Charlie saw the true horror of the suited man, the horror that had been hidden from him in plain sight the entire time. The veil was pulled back, the boy's eyes had been opened. This thing wasn't his friend. It was a monster. And Charlie could finally feel the evil emanating from the faceless demon, understand how terrifying it had actually looked. It loomed over the traumatized child, enjoying his victim's fear as a swarm of black tentacles erupted from its back and floated in the air around him, almost like a mockery of angel wings. Charlie let out a scream of terror, and he ran back in the direction he'd come from, accidentally dropping his teddy somewhere behind him.
Mommy! Daddy! Help me!
He cried out, bolting through the forest in a desperate attempt to get away from the monster that had pretended to be his friend for so long. His parents had always told him not to talk to strangers, and he should have listened. Then again, his compliance was never a factor in the suited man's plan. Charlie soon reached the steep rocky hill and threw himself against it, clawing and scratching at it in a blind panic. His fingernails broke and bled against the frigid stones. His hands and feet were covered in scrapes and bruises, but his efforts were to no avail. There was no way out of this, and he knew it. He was trapped, crying and whimpering in terror. Charlie could only curl up on the ground and watch as Mr. Slim slowly approached him, his hands folded behind his back. The boy was sobbing, screaming for someone, anyone to help him, but his voice was snuffed out by the thick sheet of mist that engulfed the forest. The suited man was standing over him now, looking down at him without any hint of emotion. But just when Charlie thought he was done for, something unexpected happened. The awful sounds went away, the mist began to dissipate, the air started warming back up, and he was finally able to hear things from the outside world again. He watched in confusion as Mr. Slim's tentacles retracted into his back, and the dark aura emanating from the creature, the evil sensation that was making him feel physically ill, disappeared entirely. He knelt down to the child, extending a pale, bony hand, holding the beloved teddy bear out to the boy who dropped it.
Happy birthday, Charlie.
The suited man said in a soothing voice. It took him a minute to figure out what was going on, and when he did, a smile spread across his face as he giggled with relief. Mr. Slim had never wanted to hurt him. This had all been nothing more than an elaborate prank. The two had been playing jokes on one another for some time now, and they'd been having a blast finding new ways to scare themselves for just as long. It had been a horrible, nasty, mean-spirited prank, but a prank nonetheless. Charlie was far too relieved to be angry with his friend, and with tears of both fear and joy trickling down his face, he reached out and took the stuffed animal from his hand. Hugging it tightly, in that moment, Charlie was truly happy. And that's why the suited man had waited until then to strike. Black threads as cold as ice erupted from the ground and quickly wrapped around the boy, encasing the lower half of his body like bandages on a mummy, before he even realized what was happening. All of the horrible things he'd been feeling came rushing back all at once, and it became hard to breathe or even think as the threads constricted him and his teddy bear. With tears streaming down his face and the screams of his parents ringing in his ears, he used his last breath to let out a strangled cry for help. The only cry that the suited man would allow them to hear.
Help me! Someone help! 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 Someone help! Mommy! Daddy!
Finally, agonizingly, the black threads wrapped around his head, and the last thing he saw before they covered his face was the suited man watching him emotionlessly, as if Charlie was nothing more than a toy he'd grown tired of. Then, his world went dark and he knew no more. Meanwhile, an unwilling spectator could only watch in horror as the cocoon of darkness sank into the ground, melting into the shadows without a trace, just as Charlie's parents came over the top of the hill, accompanied by a small search party of beachgoers. However, none of them could see or hear any of the horrors that the missing boy had just witnessed. To them, it was nothing more than a normal, undisturbed forest, and nobody felt the presence of the faceless demon standing only a few feet away, watching them desperately searching for his newest victim. He was invisible to everyone other than Lauren, who was powerless to do anything. Then, the memory froze and the suited man turned to face her, his voice full of malice.
There is no point in sleeping. Not even your dreams can save you from me.
Thank you for listening to Blood and Venom, written by Arthur Faraday, under the username WoodMr13. Distributed on Archive of Our Own. Season 2 of FanScape has been funded by the Nevada Arts Council and the National Endowment of the Arts. Starring Aubrey Lima as Lauren Jones and young Charlie, David Klein II as the narrator, Chris McConaughey as the Slender Man, Kylie Lee as younger Diane Matheson, Max Marshall as Charles Matheson, guest starring Harlan Guthrie as the introduction narrator. Intro and credits music created by Dylan Griggs. Special thanks to our fellow podcasting friends who have helped make Season 2 possible at Malevolent, Through the Fog, The Impala Films, creators of Haunted and audio drama, Woe Begone, The Morbid Forest, and our friends at World Beyond and Jabun Audio. Before we end the episode, I just want to take a moment to say that while Season 2 of FanScape was funded by a grant, future seasons will be done so out of pocket. This show has a high production cost, and any assistance you can give, be it by sharing FanScape with a friend, or by joining our Patreon or Ko-Fi, or even buying merch to help fund the show financially, would be greatly appreciated and will help make Season 3 come sooner rather than later. Links for this and everything else mentioned in the credits can be found in the description or at thefanscape.com. Thank you for listening.